Got some comments in the live chat, Kevin, concerning the quarterback situation. N'Kosi Perry obviously is the guy with the experience. Jaron Williams brings a slightly different skill set, and then Tate Martell would be the aberration of a skill set in comparison to the other two. So is there a particular player, based on what you know, there's little to go on, again, aside from Perry and his roughly half season played last year, there's little to go on that's on record. Martell's appearances were in mop-up duty and blowout games. But based on what you've seen, both in person and on tape, what you've heard, the scouting reports, the strengths and weaknesses, who would be your favorite? And what do you think the coaches, Manny Diaz in particular, Danny Eno secondarily, are favoring in this quarterback battle?
I mean, obviously the experience does go a long way for N'Kosi Perry. Between the other two quarterbacks, I believe they have maybe 2 drives between them. And it's definitely concerning to look at when you look at experience, because in my opinion, experience is a lot when it comes to a starting quarterback. You want a guy who at least knows how to play at the college level. Perry did look good last year. I think his stats, while lackluster at best, a lot of that was because his wide receivers weren't giving him any help at all throughout the season. So I think when you look into it next year, and N'Kosi Perry's looked good in fall camp, and so has spring camp, excuse me, and so has Jaron Williams. Tate Martell's looked a little bit behind, but you do expect that, given that he was a recent transfer. He hasn't fully gotten used to any of the playbook. He did look good in the spring game, and his best chance of winning it is if he looks good going into summer, and then of course going into the fall camp. I don't think Miami's in any rush to announce that starting quarterback yet. They kind of can take it day by day. They can take it play by play. They have no rush to announce that quarterback to the world, given that all 3 of the guys are talented. They all have talent. Tate Martell was I believe, 5-star quarterback, or high 4-star coming out of high school. He had committed to Ohio State, and he had looked in line to take the job going into next season before Justin Fields decided to transfer to Ohio State and had gotten his waiver approved. If it was me, I would say Jared Williams starts week 1. But it wouldn't surprise me if any of the 3 would start once week 1.
So I know we discussed this last week in regards to expectations for this team. And of course, 7-5 last year during the regular season was an underachievement in that division. I certainly saw both sides of the argument in regards to whether we can expect some miraculous run to 12-0, or if we can just see nominal improvement, because there's just too much talent on this team, you would think, against this schedule and against that division, to lose 5 games a year. Again, it seems as though you're thinking 9-3 would be a decent showing.
Yeah, the expectation for Miami this year, and we have to temper it because Manny Diaz is still a first-year head coach. While he's had a terrific start to it, and he's at least won the offseason in the sense of transfers and in the sense of buying back or getting people to buy back into the Miami hype, first-year head coaches are bound to have some struggles in their first year, and Manny Diaz will have his. I think the expectation has to be at least to get to Charlotte for the conference championship, and then seeing where it takes you. Whether that's 9-3 or a 10-2 or a 11-1 record is still up to debate, because you do still have some tougher games on the schedule. Florida week 1 is not going to be an easy game by any stretch of the imagination. UNC can surprise you. They've beaten Miami before, and they've proven that they can at least compete with Miami. Now this year, UNC is a little different. Virginia is obviously going to be probably your biggest competition when it comes to winning the Coastal. Last year they won the Belk Bowl. They dominated the Belk Bowl. They had really turned that corner, it looks like. And this year they bring back their quarterback. They bring back a lot of their important pieces. You expect them to at least compete with Miami. And obviously last year it was a game in Virginia, so it was a little harder to play. And Miami had kind of shot themselves in the foot with not having a clear and cut quarterback at that point in the season. But I think a realistic expectation is a 10-2, 9-3 record. You go into the conference championship, you see if maybe you can shock Clemson, which, let's be honest, right now is probably a 1% chance of happening. Past that, though, you hope that you win your bowl game, and then really that year 2 of the Manny Diaz era is where you start to really heighten your expectations, much like it was with Mark Richt. He had his first season, he had struggled a bit. It didn't look natural. He had won his bowl game in Orlando. So then that next season, his expectations were higher. And of course, they had made the Orange Bowl. They had made the conference championship. They had beat FSU. They had really surpassed a lot of the expectations that were put on them. But even then, it wasn't the best season. So a lot of it has to be not based on the actual win-loss record, but on the actual play and how it looks. Because you can be 7-5, but look good just as easily as you can be 12-0 and look like a terrible team. So the expectations do have to be tempered a little bit, in my honest opinion.
And I was making the same point in our last live stream, talking Florida State football the last hour, because I had Willie Taggart a little bit lower rated than a few of my guests in my ACC coaches rankings. And I made the point that going 5-7 with a roster that's comprised of top 10 to 15 recruiting classes is bad enough. But I will give some leeway to a first-year head coach and getting his system entrenched into the players, the culture, the environment, the transition of getting used to coaching those players, the players to the position coaches and the head coach, and all of the transition that needs to be made. But to go 5-7 is one thing, and I still think that that's just not not something that should be acceptable, considering an ACC that's not extremely strong, although Florida State did have a difficult schedule with Notre Dame and Florida in the non-conference. But to go 5-7 and to do it in the manner in which Willie Taggart did it, where they were not competitive, they played what I count 3 decent games, and one of those was a loss against Miami, where they played a really good game for 3 quarters, and then they let them off the hook and gave the game away. But otherwise, they played a good game against Wake Forest. They beat them by 3 touchdowns, a good, decent Wake Forest team that won a bowl game. And they beat Boston College by 1 point at home. They should do that. Otherwise, they were abysmal. So had they lost some of those games, like the Virginia Tech game that they lost by 3 touchdowns, had they scored some points and only lost by a field goal, had they not been bludgeoned by Syracuse 30-7 and lost by 1 score, okay. But the way in which they arrived at 5-7, they had to have one of the worst teams in college football, Louisville, hand them the game. I just think was a deplorable effort by Willie Taggart and Florida State last season. And just the point in him going 5-7 was worse than some other teams that went 5-7, considering the talent and considering the manner in which they just seemed ill-prepared week after week after week after week. Do you have any thoughts, Kevin, about the rest of the division? And since we're on the topic of Florida State, your hated rival.
I mean, yeah, I think Florida State takes us another step this year. I mean, they're going to be a better team. 5-7 is terrible, and with the talent that they have and the talent that they brought back, I see no way that they finish next season at 5-7. Now, will they get over the 9-win hump? Probably not. It takes still time to recover from a 5-7 season, regardless of what way you put it. I think Kendall Briles is a great hire for them. What he did at FAU in his short time there was impressive. I mean, he had made them into a legitimate college football program by the looks of it. And while a lot of the credit will go to Lane Kiffin, and deservingly so, Briles had done a lot to help that offense progress to the next level. The rest of the division, again, I mentioned Virginia, and I think they are the team to at least compete with Miami in the Coastal. Clemson is obviously going to be the number 1 team. There's no doubt about it. There seems to be a lot of weird, I don't know if it's underrating on Syracuse, but I believe the over-under right now is at 5.5 wins, which if you're looking to make easy money at this point, take it, because I see no way that they finish next season not bowl eligible. What they've done in the few years leading up to this year is impressive. And then while they lose Eric Dungy, DeVito had some time under center, and if he looks to be the clear starter, then they'll be fine. I would say I think Syracuse finishes as the 2nd best team in the ACC, Miami 3rd, and then of course Clemson 1.
Syracuse, of course, after 2 seasons of 4-8 under Dino Babers, in which they had, of course, the upset win over Clemson, but still only won 4 games the previous season in 2017. Showed out at 9-3, and as Kevin mentioned, was the second seed in the ACC, and then won the bowl game over West Virginia, although a depleted West Virginia club that had none of its top offensive players playing in that game, but still they won the game by 2 scores. So, yes, Syracuse. So what I'm looking at here is we know they play in the tougher of the 2 divisions. I always look at who do you have to play in the other division, which is key, of course, and then the non-conference schedule. So the non-conference schedule is nothing too daunting. Liberty, Maryland, Western Michigan, and Holy Cross. So my goodness, Syracuse could pick up 4 wins right there. They probably should be 4-0, and maybe there'll be a pick'em game probably, or a slight underdog at Maryland just because it's on the road. But that's pretty much of a toss-up. And if anything, Syracuse was the better team last year. So even if they go 3-1, then they've got to go 3-5 in the ACC to get the win versus Vegas.
And the games that they play out of conference aren't in any way difficult. They have Duke, who they should be beating. They have, who else do they have?
The other games against
Pittsburgh, who I think they beat, especially if it's at home. Then you're asking them if they finish 3-1, and let's say they finish 3-1 non-conference, they lose a game to Maryland, which is possible. Then you're asking them to win 1 game against NC State, Clemson, Florida State, Boston College, Louisville, and Wake Forest. I think they can win at least 2 of those, maybe even 3 of those. So I think right now they're probably the second best team in the ACC, just based on, if we're going based off the past few years and then going into this season, the experience at head coach, the experience at quarterback is going to help them going into next season.